presentations, so we're happy to see you, and if there's new faces, come and see us again. We're kind of doing this over maybe a year and a half span or so, because in researching our own history, we found that our sanctuary, the cornerstone was laid in 1921, but the construction wasn't complete until the spring of 1923, just after the end of World War I. So in honor of that, we've been looking back at the last 100 years and enjoying a lot of different things that have had to do with our church and its place in our community. So, and Donald Roebling, and this room we're sitting in enjoying our lovely lunch, is named after Donald Roebling, as you will learn lots of details here in a moment. And it used to be, the ceiling wasn't here. It went all the way up, as we say, and had basketball hoops, and people did skating and all kind of things. So we'll let Mr. Luisi tell you all about that. But anyway, we're glad that you're here, and also we are today just making the final proofs on a brochure that will go out about our concert series, which starts back up in October on the second Sunday. So we'll be getting those materials out to you as well, but welcome. Vincent Luisi is our presenter today. He's the director of the Dunedin History Museum, has been there up there, I think, 28 years now. Yep. Very well known to folks in our community and a real expert on local history. So let's give Vinny a great round of applause and let him get started. Thank you.
That was very nice. Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me on this? That good? A little louder? Okay, good. First of all, I want to thank you all for allowing me some time to talk about Donald Roebling, his history here with the church, as well as some of his individual history. I've been sitting with some of the ladies and gentlemen, and we've had some interesting conversations. Just out of curiosity, is there anyone else in the office right here who has or knew Donald Roebling? Is that right? I'm sure you have your own stories on him as well, but what I'm going to kind of try to tell you is a little bit about his personality, a little bit about his family, and a little bit about his time in between his charity work, his family, and eventually what happened and where things worked out with him on that. Before I start the slides, for those who don't know Donald Roebling, his family was a very interesting family. They were in the Suspension Bridge and Cable Company. Started in New York City, Brooklyn to be precise. It is Donald Roebling's great-grandfather who helped build the Brooklyn Bridge. So the Roebling family goes way back on engineering and technology. Donald himself was a very, not a good student, but he loved in his mind to do engineering. He did go to an engineering school, graduated. Again, the family had some money, so he did not want to stay up north where the family was based. So he bought this home in beautiful harbor in there. Oh, you okay? Okay. And has anyone been in his home at all? I mean, it's still a beautiful home. It's very hard to see now because of the big fence and the trees around it, but it is sort of a Tudor home. And I noticed, I believe it's in this frame. You'll see a picture of it. And we'll talk a little bit about his use with the home and what he did. And Donald was a very interesting man in many, many ways. First of all, this is a wonderful standard photography shot of Donald. And but if you knew him, and again, he was a very charitable man, loved kids, loved to have fun with the kids. To give you an example, he loved the holidays. One of his favorite holidays was Halloween. And now remember, the Depression, 1930s, it wasn't unusual. And in Clearwater, Dunedin, Halloween was celebrated by a lot of the kids in school. They had parades. They did a lot of different things. But Donald Roebling would make it a traditional event that kids would come to his house. And he would decorate the whole front of the house with ghosts, things that move, sound effects. And again, this is in the late 30s, early 40s. And if you had the opportunity, and most kids made it a point to visit Donald Roebling's, because remember, a candy bar at that time was about 3 times the size of what you get now, and it was a nickel. So it wasn't unusual for Donald Roebling to give out Hershey bars, like the size of my hand. They were huge, and he would hand them out to any of the kids that came. And finally, when he ran out of the candy, he would give kids quarters, which that was pretty hefty in the 30s. So he was a very generous man, and he loved to do things for kids. That was one of the reasons he donated through his family proceeds for here to work for families and kids, as well as the hospital. He was a charitable man. He was a bit eccentric, and we're going to talk about a few of his things on his eccentric side, but he was a charitable man till the time he passed away. But he was also a rather large man. And it's a little hard to see, it's a little deceiving. But Donald had a slight rare disease where his extensive body spread out as it went down to his hips. And there were always stories about Donald. Again, I'm not belittling him or anything. That was just a physical thing that he had. But 2 things he would do is he loved to go to the movies, and he would go with guests. He had traditionally a front row seat in the Capitol Theater, and he had a special seat made for him where they combined 2 seats so that he could sit comfortably in the theater, and that was Donald Roebling's seat. You did not sit in Donald's in case he came late, or you were sitting near him in the movie theater. He would also had his car specially made so the front seat and the door was a little wider for him to get into so he could drive his car. As I said, he was slightly eccentric. Besides children's Halloween parties, he'd love to have for people in Clearwater and some of his friends in Dunedin. It was a VIP event. Not everybody was welcome to come. You had to be invited. And we at the museum in Dunedin have one of his special invitations. And if you see it, it's like a pirate scroll. I mean, it's beautifully colored. It's a pen and ink drawing, and it's like, you're being welcomed to one of his Halloween events, and it has a scroll and a label on it, and you would bring that to the party. Everybody would dress up, and unbeknownst to many of his guests, you'd be invited to walk out in his backyard, which again, I know several of you have been in. He had a beautiful pool, which you'll see a photo of, but in the meantime for Halloween, again, it was his practical joke aside, he had decorated and had hidden things that would jump out, skeletons that would come down from the trees. His favorite thing is it was completely dark in there, except for a few lights strategically placed. And he loved to scare the men and the women. You would have to go through with a rope. So you would follow the rope through his bushes and everything. And in one spot, he would use gunpowder. And he would, once you got to that tree, he would flash off the gunpowder to scream, and everybody would be screaming at it as it went off. And then just when you were about ready to relax, another skeleton would come down and land on you on that. So he was a little erratic, but again, the man had a higher than average quality in his intellect and everything. But again, being a practical joker, one time he had a beautiful boat, and he just got tired of it. And just, again, I guess having money, you can do things like this. But he had one of his workers with him, and you'll see some of the workers that worked in his shop, his machinery shop, where he told them to buy dynamite, and they set up a remote control, and it was a speedboat, but quite expensive and made out of wood. And today, I don't even want to think of what it would cost. But he would send it out to the Gulf, and just at the precise moment, he'd flick open a switch, push the button, and the speedboat just literally just blew up for the crowd. So he just loved to do things like that. And someone said, "Why'd you do that?" He said, "I just wanted to see a big bang with a boat." So he just did things like that. Donald did so many things for the community. He helped projects with the Capitol Theater. He helped the church here. He helped the hospital. He did special functions for the kids. He set up parades on the streets. One time, actually 2 or 3 times, and you'll see. Is everybody familiar with Gasparilla in Tampa? When he first developed the Alligator tank, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes, he was very proud of his device, and he actually had it made so that it would be in the Gasparilla parade. And so in the 1938 parade, it actually was going through downtown Tampa. And it was not unusual when the Marines came here, and we'll talk about that he would have 2 or 3 of the Alligator tanks in front of the Capitol Theater on a Saturday afternoon so everybody could see them. And some of the Marines would be there to instruct how they worked and things like that. So he worked with the government. We're going to show you the awards he received and things like that. But this is what I call his best profile photo. This is kind of his best memory. So I have to push the button, so I'm sorry I have to turn my back to you, but I'll flick the next button. It worked. So, as I said, Donald Roebling was an engineer by trade. He had an engineering degree. He really didn't have to work if he didn't want to. The family was independently wealthy, but in his home, his Tudor home, he had a garage workshop. His general attitude was, I call him a major scale tinkerer. He tried to do things out of the ordinary, something that wasn't available, something that didn't exist. And in the mid-1930s, from family and friends you heard from, the Clearwater, Dunedin area had a huge hurricane. And he was very concerned with it because things flooded. People got caught, a family got caught on Hog Island or Honeymoon Island at that time, and this is right before it became Honeymoon Island. But he had heard stories about Indian Rocks Beach, and he realized there was a need for some kind of device that could rescue people during hurricanes. Something that would float and something that could go on land. And at this point in time, there really wasn't anything like that. And so he went back to his shop, and that's his garage. And he always had 4 or 5 men that he hired as his engineers and technical men. Always kept them on his whole life. And they would go meet in his garage. He'd start out with a flat piece of paper and start drawing. And he says, "This is what I want." So he started drawing what he saw necessary as a emergency survival vehicle. That's what it started out as. It wasn't military. And he came up with some ideas. He used what he had available. Some of it was aluminum at that time. Now, right before World War II, aluminum was available. And you'll see later they had to change the design because mostly aluminum during World War II we used for aircraft. It got rare. It was hard to find. But Donald and his crew came up with the first prototype of the Alligator tank. And it was made strictly as a survival and rescue vehicle. And that's what it looked like. You could see the back. was made so that people could get in there and protect them as they came back to the main shore. And if you look, they had a tractor set of wheels. It wasn't just regular wheels. It was curved metal slats so that it worked like a regular tank. And it wasn't unusual later on in Dunedin when they were training that some of those curved pieces on the trail of the tracking would break off or feel, and for the next 20 years people would be digging new roads and they'd find pieces of the tractor stuck in the ground or found out. But Mr. Roebling eventually was contacted in 1938. People in the military saw an article in Life magazine about what he had done for hurricane and rescuing. And the military thought, we knew we were coming to the war episode, and basically we knew where we'd be fighting in the future. And the Marines had no idea what to use at that time, and they thought they could utilize this machinery to be changed into a military device. So they talked to Donald Roebling, and again, the man was very, besides being a wonderful human being, he was ultra patriotic. And he gave the Marines full control and patent rights, didn't want a dime for it. He says, if this is going to save American lives, I'm giving you my engineering plans, and I'm giving you anything I can help you with to make this work for the American armies. Well, the Navy and the Marines came down to Dunedin, and we'll see that in a second. This is actually when the Marines finally came down in 1941 here. The basic premise is, as Mr. Roebling designed the ultimate final model with testing in Dunedin and some in his garage in Clearwater, the Marines set up a barracks. And this is the barracks that is in, or was in, Dunedin. If you go along alternate 19, everybody familiar where Dunedin's golf course is? Right there around the golf course. The west side of that road turned out to be the military base, right near the golf course. Palm Drive and alternate 19, that corner, was the entranceway, and you'll see today there is a historical marker to identify that. But there was 3 or 4 Marine buildings there. The Kellogg's Mansion for a while was given to the Marines, the offices, as an R&R building, as well as Mr. Roebling using his own house for the Marines. As they built the barracks, they needed some place to stay, and they stayed not only there, but in downtown Dunedin on Edgewater Drive was the Dunedin Hotel. So until all the barracks were built by the golf course, that's where they stayed, in the general vicinity of that whole area. So this was the main barracks for non-coms and for some of the trainees. This is where the military would come to actually learn how to train and maneuver and drive these tanks. And Roebling, during this whole 2-year period, would perfect the machine. First of all, he had to change from aluminum, went to a harder metal, went to steel. One, because of armament, it had to be like rocket shells or bullet penetrating. And second, because it got heavier, he had to change his motor, and he worked with the Ford Motor Company in Michigan to develop a motor that would first be good enough to carry something of that weight, but also be able to be used in water. So again, I'm going to give you a quiz here for a second. Eventually, it was called the amphibious Alligator tank. So everybody knows what amphibious means, right? We have, okay, it is, again, an alligator or a frog. Amphibious means it goes on land and water, and Roebling's device did. And you'll see some testing photos of what we have here. So the Marines stayed here for approximately 6 months to a year. They trained on it. Some of the instructors would stay during the time period. The Marine barracks were here until the end of the war, and then they were removed and went back to rental property that the Skinners owned. So once he got the tank in working order for the Marines, they started making the original 200, roughly 200, at the Skinner Machinery Company. Again, right along Douglas Street, right on the one side that Mr. Joe Kokolakis is building on now. It was at one time the citrus packing plant and packing crates. It was right there. Mr. Roebling set up a contract with Mr. Skinner, and originally the first one or two were perfected there, and then eventually roughly 200 were built in Dunedin, the first 200. But when they found out they were going to need more and more, Dunedin couldn't keep up with the process of building that many, and you'll see in a second, the main company was food manufacturing company, but they built a brand new plant in Lakeland, which that building partly is still there, and that's where most of them will come back, be built, and you'll see photos of them being built there, and then come back to Dunedin for testing, and then they would send them out. And for those who don't know where the Alligator, mostly they were used in the Pacific. They were made by the Marines so you could board from a ship, get into the tank, it would float on the water through the rotors, and then land on beaches such as Iwo Jima, Guadalcanal, the Philippines. And later you'll see, but the Marines said if they did not have this device to help land on these islands, a lot more Marines would have died trying to cross the beach. You can imagine, again, on D-Day, you can imagine how much more intensive casualties it would have been if Roebling hadn't donated his services. After the patent was given over to the Marines, this is a photo of Mr. Roebling with some of the military brass for the Marine Corps at the Marine barracks. And he was, again, involved with every move of the action. If there was a reason for a mechanical or technical change, Roebling gave all the time he thought was necessary. Again, he gave his time. It was not a costing issue. He just said, let me help my country. So he would meet on a regular period of time, find out if everything was working good. If not, he would get his technical advisors, go to Lakeland, find out what they needed to do on the factory line, and then repair or make that change, and then make the other tanks work a lot better than what they were working as on that. Again, I just kind of want to show you, you'll see them on land, and again, this is water. Just wanted to show to you, this is actually coming off the Marine barracks, and it's the Marines coming off the side. It looks a lot different today with homes, but that was the waterfront that faced Caladesi and Honeymoon Island. And part of the plan was, because they needed practice, the Marines would come off the dirt and the ground and the bushes from there and bring them over to Caladesi and Honeymoon Island to land, to practice landing on beaches. So that's what they would do and train in that way. And in the grass lane areas, they would practice going through tree areas, wooded areas, just to get all their maneuvering done so they got familiar with how to drive this tank in all conditions. If you look, as I mentioned, Mr. Roebling, through that whole time period, was most accommodating. And you can just see him on the far right there. He would have for the officers get-togethers. picnics, barbecues, again, all his expenses. He paid for everything. He would have the officers come over. He had a beautiful pool that overlooked the Gulf, and he would invite the officers come over to go swimming in his pool anytime that they could get away. So he virtually offered his home as a second place for the Marines to relax and entertain themselves as well. He got along with everybody, not just the officers at the Marine base, but the enlisted men. Matter of fact, he particularly liked to talk to the enlisted men. They were the ones driving the tanks, and he really wanted to know what they thought about it. He prized, and he was not the type of man that didn't want to hear negative. If anything, those negativities that he may have heard or occurred, he turned into positives to make his equipment better. So he was a man that truly believed in, I'm not here for an ego, I'm not here to make money, I'm here to save lives. And that was, throughout the war, that was his main cause. This is when I mentioned that after Dunedin really couldn't keep up with the manufacturing part, Mr. Roebling and the food manufacturing company made a contract deal, and they actually, within less than 3.5 months, built a whole factory in Lakeland. Lakeland gave them land, an area that had a lakeside next to it so they could bring the tanks out. And so roughly with every 100 tanks that came off the manufacturing, and in Lakeland, over another 1,000 were built. Eventually, the contract was sent to San Diego, and the remaining ones were built in San Diego. Because remember, the war in the Pacific, they were leaving from there, so the rest were built in San Diego. But they built this whole manufacturing company in less than 4 months, and out of